The Yearlings Club Forum Series is pleased to join with the Diversity Program, Culture, and Climate to acknowledge the contribution women to our community have made throughout this history. We are pleased to host our panel today and look forward to an engaging and informative program. Again, we welcome you, and it's my pleasure to turn the program over to Dr. Dawson Edwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Sedge. Good afternoon, evening, everyone. I am super excited about today's Yearlings Club Forum Series celebrating Women's History Month. And so we have a power-packed panel, like seriously power-packed panel, and I can't wait to engage in this conversation that we will have today. I am Cherie Dawson Edwards. I am the Associate Dean for Diversity, Engagement, Culture, and Climate here in the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Louisville. I will just say this as a point of privilege. I started this position in October. I've done several Yearlings Club Series forums since I've been in the position, and I'm really excited about all of them, but I am very excited about the women here joining me today. I know them in various capacities, some newer capacities, some decades capacities. And so I'm really just excited to be in this position to be able to have this conversation with them today. So I'll just do a little introduction and then we'll get right into the panel. Normally I read the individual bios at the beginning, but these women are so phenomenal. I think that would take up a lot of time. So I'm going to read their bios as I ask them their various questions. So the inaugural Yearlings Club Forum Series Women's History Month program was held in 2016 when we recognized the state's African-American female judges, the first time it has been done. Since then, we have recognized African-American female engineers, attorneys, and the newly elected Metro Council members. We are proud to continue to recognize women and their work. Women are rising into leadership roles in politics as in other institutions. Research has shown that in general, these women are not clones of male leaders. They typically are more participative and democratic than men in their approach to leadership. The goals that they pursue tend to place greater emphasis on the public good, consistent with their more compassionate and egalitarian values. These, nevertheless, the fundamental fairness that is highly valued in democratic societies, as well as the competence of women who vie for political office and other leader roles, should facilitate women's increasing participation in leadership. Women make up more than half of Kentucky's 4.5 million population, but only 6 of the 38 Senate seats and just 30 of the 100 in the House are held by women. This evening, we are pleased to have representatives from local and state legislative bodies and nonprofit organization who has been instrumental in advocating for legislation that affects the rights of individuals and families. I'd like to welcome each one of you for joining us here today, and it is my pleasure to introduce our first panelist. Louisville Metro Councilwoman Paula McCraney. Known for her quick wit and energetic personality, Paula McCraney lives her life with the understanding that to whom much is given, much is required. Elected November 6, 2018 as the third citizen to serve on the Metro Council for District 7, Paula proudly represents 25 eastern suburban cities and 6 neighborhoods. Councilwoman McCraney serves as chairwoman of the Committee on Equity and Inclusion and serves on the Budget, Government Oversight, and Audit Committees. Councilwoman McCraney has co-sponsored several key pieces of legislation, including the ban on no-knock search warrants and the creation of the Commission for Persons with Disabilities. She is the architect of the landmark Civilian Review and Accountability Board ordinance, having co-chaired a 33-member review board task force to write the legislation and lobby for its approval. It passed through the council on a 25-to-1 vote and was signed into law by the mayor on December 2nd, 2020. In addition to her committee duties on the council, she is an appointed member of the Equity and Contracting and Procurement Task Force, Domestic Violence Prevention Coordinating Council, and the Juneteenth Jubilee Commission. A recipient of numerous community awards and participant in numerous leadership and executive training programs, she has been recognized both locally and nationally for her volunteerism and leadership roles. Councilwoman McCraney earned her MA in Management and Leadership from Webster University and BS in Business Administration from Oklahoma State University. She and her husband of 35 years are the proud parents of 2 adult sons. Thank you so much, Councilwoman McCraney, for joining us today. I first want to just say that I watched Cafe Louie yesterday morning, and I really appreciate your perspectives and pushback. So thank you for your strength and leadership in a situation and panel like that. So I totally respect you and understand how it must feel sometimes to be the only in a situation. So thank you. So it's been a year since Breonna Taylor's murder, and police accountability still remains an issue in the minds of many residents. While a new police chief has been hired and new police policies and procedures have been put in place, police oversight remains a key issue. Councilwoman McCraney, you chaired the task force that led to the creation of the Citizen Review and Accountability Board. This is a monumental achievement that would not have happened without your leadership and the council members who were committed to that charge. Can you please provide us with an overview of the role of the new board, and that the new board will have in addressing citizen complaints and ensuring oversight on police actions? While we know it would take more time than you currently have now, can you please highlight the key responsibilities?
Thank you, and thank you all for having us today. It is such an honor to be here amongst all my friends and the people that I look to as my role models as well. So thank you for that. And the Civilian Review and Accountability Board is a very key piece of legislation that was enacted right in the heart of the protest. And it just shows that when you listen to the constituents and when you listen to the people that you represent, great things can happen. And that's what this is, I think. And I'm proud to say that 11 members have been identified as members for the board, and the Metro Council is in the midst of approving those 11 people. So on next Thursday, we will hopefully approve all 11 that were presented to us by the mayor's office. And those 11 individuals will have an opportunity to listen to the Inspector General and the report that the Inspector General will provide to that board. That was the beauty of this Civilian Review Board. We also, at the same time, wrote in an opportunity for an Inspector General. That will be a trained and experienced individual who will indeed do the investigations if there is indeed a complaint or a shooting in the Louisville Metro Police Department. And so the board members get an opportunity to listen to the data, listen to the Inspector General present the case, and then approve whether or not they want to advance that investigation forward. Then once that investigation is completed, the board gets to listen to the evidence and determine what they want to do from there. They do not have the body or the authority to make any type of disciplinary actions, but they can indeed make recommendations to the current police chief and make policy recommendations for some changes. So it is a great opportunity for our community to feel good about another set of eyes looking at the police department and some of the outcomes that may not be so positive in some behavior.
So I have a quick follow-up question because I know how much, we have community participation in this forum series, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about the selection process. I know that it was very public, but not everybody understands how representatives were selected to serve on the review board. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, the Metro Council had 3 recommendations that they could put forward to the mayor's office. So out of the 3 spots that the Metro Council has, we could put up 2 names each. So we provided him with 6 names. Then there are a group of 8 nonprofit organizations that were identified in the ordinance that could also suggest some 2 2 names each. And those were organizations like the Louisville Urban League, the NAACP, the Young Professionals Organization, GLI, the Lawyers Association. And so the mayor could choose from those 8 4 organizations, and the people that they recommended, he could choose one amongst those. And then he has 2 choices, and then people can self-select. And so that would make up the 11 members. And then he chooses, he sends those names to the Metro Council, and the Metro Council must approve the nominees. And if you watched on last Tuesday at the committee meeting, you know that some consider a couple of them controversial, and it was unfortunate how that went down. It was very, very rude of some of my colleagues to question some of the nominees the way they did. It's unnecessary, and I am going to be advocating for the placement of these nominees, all 11 of them.
Thank you very much. And I understand one of those nominees is one of my former students who I know is absolutely capable of making adequate decisions and caring about our community. So I appreciate you standing with them. So I know there'll be questions about, that's a hot topic in our city and our state these days. So I'm sure we'll get back to it. I just want to remind the viewers or the audience, it's so weird to say audience in a virtual setting, but the audience, that you please feel free to drop any questions that you have in the chat or in the Q&A section. And once we get through the panelist questions that I have to ask, then I'll be happy to open it up for audience members. So thank you, Councilwoman McCraney. Our next panelist is State Representative Joni Jenkins. The Honorable Joni Jenkins was elected to the Kentucky House of Representatives in 1995. She currently serves as the House of Representatives Minority Floor Leader and is a member of the House Session Standing Committee, Committee on Committees and Rules Committee, the Interim Joint Committee, State Government Committee, Statutory Committee, Legislative Research Commission, and Child Welfare Oversight and Advisory Committee. I think everyone now understands why I'm reading the bios right before the questions. In addition to her committee membership, Representative Jenkins is a member of the 2020 Budget Conference Committee, Women's Caucus, Kentucky Nonprofit Caucus, Louisville Metropolitan Caucus, and the Bourbon Trail Caucus. She serves on numerous community boards and advisory committees. Representative Jenkins is a communications specialist and received her BA from the University of Kentucky. So I don't know if she remembers, but I hope that she does. But I met Representative Jenkins, a long time ago. I was fresh out of college. My first job out of college, she was on the board of the nonprofit that I worked for. And so I am just super pleased that I am in a professional circle where I can engage with her in this way, because as a 22, 23-year-old, I didn't know what I was doing in life. And so I certainly appreciate her leadership over the decades. I'm nowhere near 22 or 23 anymore, but it's certainly awesome and great to see you, Representative Jenkins. As Minority Floor Leader, you represent the views of your Democratic colleagues in leadership meetings. It appears that one of the focuses of the legislative session during 2021 has been to limit the powers of the governor. Can you please summarize and discuss the view of the Democratic minority on the following bills? So HB 23, which would create an advisory restricting commission to draft redistricting plans. Can you please elaborate on key elements of the bill and their impact and the impact of the legislation on communities of color, especially in urban communities?
It is so great to be with you. And yes, of course, I remember you from so many years ago, and it's been so great to watch you and your career take off. And gosh, you're just amazing. So it's great to be with you. I represent a caucus of 25. I've termed us the super duper minority. Out of a chamber of 100, we have 25 members. But I will tell you, we have the most dynamic members that you can imagine. And while I wish we had a few more, I put my members up against the majority members any day. We are historically female driven. There are 17 Democratic women We're diverse. We have folks of color, and I always say a few, pretty good white guys in our caucus. It has been a session that we've seen the majority, their priorities have been to limit the powers of the governor and to increase the powers of all the other constitutional officers, which just happen to be of the same party as them. Some big issues that have come forward, you mentioned House Bill 23, which is redistricting. We redistrict every year, every 10 years after the census. So we're watching to see when the census is finalized. And this is a bill that I've been working on for many years, even when I was in the majority. Redistricting is done, we redistrict ourselves. I've always said that groups can't govern themselves and they can't redistrict themselves in a fair way. And that's where we see such gerrymandering. And we really come up with districts that I think are extreme sometimes. And that's why I think we see what has been elected, especially in the majority party this year, is folks that come from the most extreme part of the Republican Party. This piece of legislation, which was worked out with the League of Women Voters, a nonpartisan group that really just wants what's best for Kentucky. And it would make redistricting, would take the authority from redistricting momentarily away from the legislatures and to an independent group that's very well thought of who would serve on it, and would give recommendations to the legislature, and the legislature would then accept them or not, and then pass a redistricting plan. I think this is the fairest way to do it. And in fact, this is similar to what is being talked about in Congress now for everybody in the United States, just not Kentucky. So we're watching to see how the feds are working on this, because we know that we're down to 2 more days. We know House Bill 23 is not going to go anywhere. My caucus picked several different big ideas over the interim to work on it, and voting reforms were one of them. We had a working group, and I think about 12 bills that we proposed. Of course, because we're in the super duper minority, none of those have moved, but they included things like no excuse voting, registration on up until and on election day, more early voting. What did happen is we have a bill that is set to pass. It's House Bill 574, which does a lot of good things. It certainly wasn't everything. I'm sorry about my cat. It certainly doesn't do everything we wanted it to do. It allows for early voting 3 days with excuse, absentees with excuse, and then early voting the Thursday, Friday, and Saturday before Election Day. But when we look at surrounding Republican-led southern states, when we're seeing them really work hard to suppress the vote, especially of minority voters, I think we feel pretty good about 574. It came up for a vote on the last day, last Tuesday. We're in a veto break right now, but the last day we were in session was last Tuesday, and it came up for a vote. And I just asked a question about an amendment. I don't know if anybody here was watching that. I said, what does Senate Floor Amendment 1 do? And no one in the chamber knew. They had to put the bill back into the orders of the day to figure out what that amendment did. It didn't come back up, but I've had assurances that it will come back up when we're back in on the 29th and the 30th. Another area that my caucus worked on, we worked on policing, and criminal justice. And I believe my colleague could probably talk more about that. And then the third area was health disparities. So the women of the Democratic caucus rolled out a huge agenda on maternal and infant mortality, 20-something bills. Only one of them has had any action. And it is, I can't remember the number, but it's Representative Rachel Roberts from Northern Kentucky dealing with postpartum depression and having resources available through the Cabinet for Health and Family Services website. But also brings me to the Senate Bill 83, I believe you mentioned, which I think is one of the most hateful bills that I've seen in a long time. there are sometimes, I just have to tell you, after 27 years in Frankfurt, I see some things and I think, really? This is really what we're working on? And it's a bill that says that any medical professional based on their religious beliefs can deny services. I think it goes against everything that medical professionals are taught, and the rules that govern how their licensure. But it could say that, you could refuse to give Narcan to someone who's struggling with substance use disorder because you don't approve of their lifestyle. You could not provide medical care to someone of a different religion than you, or someone of a different sexual orientation that perhaps your religion doesn't agree with. It is the most hateful thing I've seen in a long time. And I've seen lots of hateful things while I've been in Frankfurt. But we, in the super duper minority, we work every day to call attention to hypocrisy and to some of the bills like House Bill 312, which really violates, would change the open records laws that we have here in Kentucky, and really, I think, let less light into what legislators do. Did I answer everything?
Thank you. You did. You covered House Bill 23, Senate Bill 83. I didn't ask you about House Bill 72. You kind of talked about voting, but the convenience of the voter. Can you talk a little bit about that one?
Here in Kentucky, you can absentee vote by mail, but you have to give a reason for wanting to vote early or not in person. And many other states have seen real success with opening that up and saying you can vote early just because it's at your convenience. I've only voted after college. I've only voted once by absentee. I was going out of state on primary day. It's the primary that Rep. Scott won. But I went down to the Board of Elections, and I have to say that I had a little pause when I signed that affidavit saying I wasn't going to be in town, because I'm like, oh, what happens if something happens? I don't go out of town. I've signed this affidavit. And, I just took it real seriously. And I think a lot of people do that. Signing a legal document to be able to vote I think is a barrier for some folks to be able to vote early. And in a community that we have folks that work 8:30 to 4:30, and getting to the poll in your own precinct can be difficult. So for folks that maybe have some age on them, or pregnant, or taking care of children, or older parents, so there's a lot of reasons that election day from 6 to 6 may not work for you. And to have a reason that you're not going to be in the county just puts a barrier for folks. So we want more people coming to vote. And I don't understand the Republican Party being against that, because, we had historic number of people vote in the last election. And, they won all across the state. We're down to 25 folks in the House. So I'm a true believer that everyone who is eligible to vote should be, and we should make more people eligible to vote. Democrats have been fighting to let felons who have served their punishments, let them have an easy track to go back to voting and to reintegrate back into society. I think we saw great success during a pandemic with voting last year, and I think we should replicate that. So that's something we're going to continue to work on.
Thank you. Actually, just as a side note, I did my dissertation many years ago on felony disenfranchisement, focusing on Kentucky. So it's been interesting to see. I mean, of course, things change from the executive function, but it's always been interesting to follow and say, you know what, my dissertation is still very relevant after all these years, because So, well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. And I concur. Like, I still didn't vote absentee, but just the new mechanisms for voting in the pandemic just has to speak volumes to access to the polls, right? So I was one of those people that did like the drop off at the boxes, and I was uncomfortable at first, because I was like, this isn't how I normally vote, but it was so convenient to drive close on my way to campus. There's a drop off box, as opposed to going this way away from work, and And so, yeah, I don't understand well, I do understand the resistance, but it's like to the detriment of them as well. So, okay, so I'm gonna move on. I was gonna talk to Representative Scott, but I think I'm gonna go to Chantrice Martin here for a minute. And so I'll introduce Chantrice, but I'll first just say that when I was sent her bio, I was like, this isn't her bio, because I know that Chantrice wears a bazillion hats, as many of us do, but for sure. So I just want to let people know that I am aware of all the things that Chantrice Martin is and does for our community, but in this space, she is operating under a certain lens, and that is why the bio I'm reading is just that lens. So I just wanted to throw that out into the universe for you, Chantrice, that I don't want any hate mail that says, but what about the other 10 pages of things that she does for our community? So Chantrice Martin is a chapter organizer for Kentuckians for the Commonwealth and West Louisville Mother, focused on dismantling the food apartheid. She is a longtime civil rights advocate focused on Black liberation. Most recently, Chantrice opened a grocery store in the former site of a pizza shop. The store's opening is the direct result of the Feed the West initiative, which was created to address food issues for West End residents. So thank you so much for joining us, Chantrice. As an organizer for Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, please describe your work as a chapter organizer and how you work with the legislature on legislation that affects families.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm a fan of yours as well. I just want to put that out there so folks know that y'all need to check out the good doctor's work. So yeah, as a KFTC organizer, you know, Kentuckians are different, right? We had our wonderful, hopefully, you know, future president, Charles Booker, talk about going from the hood to the holler, right? I had never heard of the holler, even though I was born and raised in Kentucky. I had never been to Paducah till last year. And so a lot of us think, you know, Louisville is like this island, and Kentucky as a state is not part of us, right? But one thing I've tried to do over the last few years is recognize that, like, we're all Kentuckians regardless of where you live, and many of us could be a lot further along if we link up across the state. And so my work with Kentuckians for the Commonwealth has really been about not just grassroots lobbying, not just you know, during the election, but like the full scope of what happens when someone has an idea for a bill and how that gets turned into actual law and whether or not it's enforced. We saw in Florida, they have banned no-knock warrants, right? But Diamonds Ford was still, you know, a bunch of police came into her house in the middle of the night, and she had a registered firearm and she was protecting herself, called 911 thinking someone was breaking in, but it was the police, right? So it's not just about like, hey, let's, you know, get these laws passed. It's about how do we enforce them? How do we make sure that Black people get to take advantage of these laws? The Castle Doctrine is one that to this day, most Black people cannot take advantage of, even though the great state of Kentucky allows us to carry firearms, right? And Black people who do that legally still don't reap the benefits. The fact that Kenneth Walker was arrested that night when Breonna Taylor was murdered, and none of the people who murdered her were arrested, is an unfortunate reflection of what we have to do, the work we have to do. I know Representative Scott has, like, you know, she basically lives at Frankfurt, even when it's not in session. You have folks like Katora Heron, who has like, is always up there. So like, we are constantly having to keep them in check because our representatives, our senators, all of them, they work for us. And I've said this before, if you were at a job and you didn't have a supervisor, would you work? If no one was asking you, like, where's your timesheet and did you fill this out right? And I noticed you didn't check in. Would you actually go to work? If you knew you could get paid without doing the job, would you do the job? I know I can't say that I would. I love Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, but if no one was checking on me, I'm not sure that I would do my job. And it's the same for our legislators. We are their supervisors. We have to check in on them. We have to go up there. Frankfurt is far from most places Kentuckians live by design. And so this work has had a big impact on me because previously, yes, I did a lot of, you know, protests and whatnot from college to now, but looking at the way laws are created, like, we know that there is inherent racism, but seeing it firsthand, seeing folks who are making laws for us who have never been through the things we've been through is disheartening. And I'm glad we have so many women who are leaders in this movement. A lot of these names we don't know because they're not, you know, out front, but there are a lot of people making moves every day. kind of to get the bare minimum. So I'm really excited to be on this panel. I'm a fan of all the women on this group. Like, I'm really excited to be here. I feel like I got a few more notches in my belt I need to get before I get on y'all's level. So yeah, I'm excited about that. And of course, that connects with Black Market and with Feed the West, because I mean, I'm born and raised in Louisville, mostly in the West End, and none of the houses I grew up in are there anymore due to gentrification and displacement. We lived on Greenwood, that house has been torn down. We lived on 22nd and Wilson, that house has been torn down after the landlord refused to sell it to my grandparents. And so we see this, prices are going up. I know Representative Scott is one of my neighbors, like in Parkland, and we're seeing all this development, and a lot of it is not happening with our input or with even an acknowledgement that we exist. So I know that's a lot, but essentially my work at Kentuckians for the Commonwealth is about taking all those pieces and helping folks to be grassroots lobbyists. It's not just about having a title. It's just about knowing, like, okay, I call the legislative line, I talk to this person, I write this letter, I show up to Frankfurt. So people know that however you check in, we just have to check in. It doesn't matter if you're knowledgeable about it. It doesn't matter if you got a D in social studies. It doesn't matter. If you are a Kentuckian, you deserve to be heard.
Absolutely. Can you talk a little bit about some of the legislation that was proposed or that might pass in this session, particularly Senate Bill 11, that makes damages of $500 or more to rental property a criminal offense? How might that, well, I mean, can you talk about the impact that legislation might have on lower income families?
Child, what are the key words here? Racist, classist, egregious. And I'll say this first, I'm a landlord. I have 2 properties. I live in Parkland, but I have a property in Shawnee. I have a wonderful tenant, and my previous tenant damaged property. I don't think it would have been helpful to her, me, the community, anyone to put something on her record for damaging it. These things can happen by accident. They can just happen by general wear and tear. I've seen some landlords charge someone $500 just for scratching the little plate with the light switch, scratching that, or a screw being missing, or one of the, y'all know those blinds, they always break. A little part of it breaks off, it makes the whole thing look bad. I've seen some of my other landlords, I don't want to call them colleagues, but fellow landlords, charge outrageous prices, or just be upset that the person wants to move, or they retaliate for someone complaining about very serious violations on the landlord's part. Honestly, the landlords, many of them in the West End, should be charged for the way that they're keeping these properties, for the way they treat tenants. We've had to, from Black Lives Matter Louisville, go to someone's house in the middle of the night because the landlord cut off that box, that HVAC box that's on the side of the house that keeps it cool or hot, and locked that, cut it off, cut off access because he was upset that the tenant reported him. And we had to go get that woman some fans and make sure that, everything was still working and that, we got her a place. And so I think it's absolutely ridiculous for people who've never been evicted to have this bill that's only going to hurt renters. And in the West End, I think it's around 39% home ownership. And so you're talking about a bill that's going to impact the vast majority of families in the West End. And it's particularly targeting Black families and low income families, because in Russell, I think our median income is about $19,000 a year. So you're going to charge $500 and put something on their record, further hindering them from ever getting out of that poverty cycle. So this is something that I'm embarrassed to say a Kentucky legislator proposed this. Kentucky, there are many parts of Kentucky, both rural and urban, that are devastatingly poor. So to put a further burden on Kentuckians is disgusting. And the impact on families is going to be horrendous. We already have an eviction crisis. We have a housing crisis. Even those who are in housing, it's not stable, it's not secure, it's not safe. And it's not because the neighbors, people think the West End is dangerous. It's because we have landlords who don't live here, who don't care. It's because we have legislators who don't live here and don't care. And so it's criminalizing rental property damage, and we should not let them get away with that. I think I'm gonna check my notes. I don't know everything, just so people watching this know. I don't know every single thing. I always check my notes too. So I think for this bill in particular, We still have a little bit of time. Like there's a veto session, like Representative Joni said, right? So we have some time to still do something, but this is set up this way on purpose. A lot of the lobbyists who support this, they've been talking to legislators well before any of us had time to pay attention through the pandemic, no mask, out just having a good time, living their best life. And many of us as regular citizens don't have that same access. So this would really do a lot more damage than good. And I honestly don't see any good that it would do besides giving people who are already doing bad things more money. Yeah.
So can you just for our audience in context about lobbying, like what are the challenges with being a lobbyist for like KFTC or like grassroots, kind of lobbying versus the deep pocket, you know what I'm saying? Like what are your challenges or what are the advantages? I'm not going to just assume it's a challenge, but I've talked to you before that I've been to I limit my time in Frankfurt and I totally respect those of you who serve, whether it's Metro Council or in Frankfurt, and those of you who go up there and lobby on our behalf. And so I'm always in the background if y'all ever need anything, but I'm like, I'll only go if certain people ask me. So can you just kind of tell people who haven't been to Frankfurt in that capacity, like what it's like to be there? Because I don't do a good job of explaining it at all.
Well, so there's a couple things. One, I have to chase down people. I still have not heard back from Representative Osborne. I tweeted him, emailed him, called his colleagues, emailed his colleagues like, hey, I noticed on the LRC website, you're on this committee with him. Can you nudge him for me? And I spend, oh my goodness, this month alone, I've spent at least 100 hours trying to track down some of our representatives and teaching other people, training other people how to try to track them down. Now, I'll give you an example. Representative Meeks, I called the legislative line for Representative Meeks and for Representative Osborne the same day. Representative Meeks sent me an email the next day saying, I got your message. Thank you so much for that. And it might've been an automated message. I don't know, Representative Meeks probably sent me a real message. But that was the next day. And that was the beginning of March. I still have not heard from Representative Osborne. Alternatively, for lobbyists who actually have some money and are working for corporations, they have a budget to just drive up to Frankfurt or to get a hotel for the week in Frankfurt, to take the representatives out, to do all these things that, like, me as a single mom, I do not have the time, energy, money, none of that. And that's the case for most Kentuckians. We also live really far away from the capital. Many of the people who are impacted by these bills don't even have reliable transportation. I think more than half the households in the West End do not have reliable transportation, and TARC don't go to Frankfurt. So it's really important to think about those things. And a lot of our legislators, unfortunately, don't. So being a lobbyist, like a grassroots lobbyist, which is essentially what a KFTC lobbyist is, like for me, if I do drive to Frankfurt, I get the mileage reimbursed. So I'm taking people who cannot drive themselves to Frankfurt, right? But that's still an access thing. They have to go to work. They have to get childcare. If the legislator we're supposed to meet with is running late, that's making us late coming back to Louisville, and that's possibly going to, impact their childcare, impact their job. And so there's a lot more at stake for the average person than for these really well-paid lobbyists. And so they also have no trouble getting in contact with Representative Osborne. I have some conservative colleagues who had no trouble at all. And it's discouraging because many of them don't look like this panel. There aren't as many women on that side. There aren't as many people of color. As far as I know, I don't know any poor people who are those big paid lobbyists. And alternatively, we see that those most negatively impact are all those demographics I just described. So it means that the policies created are only going to be detrimental to people who are already struggling. So that's a difference between sort of the lobbying I've been able to do, and I'll give myself like a B-, and the lobbying that people who are paid very well to do those things, and they make a lot closer to the salary of Mitch McConnell than of a Chantrice Martin.
Well, thank you for what you do, and I appreciate as an educator, I'm like, oh, let's educate the people, because I don't think that people really know like how the machine works all the time, and lots of people do, but a lot of people don't. And so, thank you for that. So we're going to turn to our last panelist. And of course, what I'd like, after Representative Scott speaks to us, I'd like to open the floor up to the panelists to comment or respond to each other as well. But I'm going to shift to our last panelist, and it wasn't any purpose to the order, but I thought I'd insert Chantrice as a lobbyist in between our two representatives, so we can all come together at the end. So State Representative Attica Scott, I know everyone knows Attica Scott, so it really needs no introduction, but to do my due diligence, I will certainly do it. State Representative Attica Scott was elected to the Kentucky House of Representatives in 2017, the first African-American female elected to the office in 20 years. Representative Scott is a member of the Budget Review Subcommittee on Education, Education Committee, Elections, Constitutional Amendments, and Intergovernmental Affairs Committee, Joint Committee on Education, Joint Committee on State Government, Joint Committee on Veterans, Military Affairs, and Public Protection, Judiciary Committee, and Natural Resources and Energy Committee. She is a member of the Women's Caucus, Kentucky Black Legislative Caucus, and Louisville Metropolitan Caucus. Attica serves and has served on numerous nonprofit and community boards, a highly regarded educator and community servant. Known for her leadership, passion, and commitment to social justice and activism, Representative Scott was a very familiar face and voice during the 2020 summer protests. In January 2021, Representative Scott introduced Breonna's Law, House Bill 21, which would expand Louisville's ban on no-knock search warrants statewide and make sure judges determine whether violent entry to serve a warrant is necessary. Representative Scott resides in West Louisville and is a proud parent of two. She received her BS from Knoxville College and MS from the University of Tennessee. So please join me in welcoming Representative Attica Scott. You are described as a passionate, fearless, and caring leader. Representative Scott, as a leader in last summer's protests following the death of Breonna Taylor, we would like for you to focus your discussion on the status of various pieces of legislation that you authored or co-sponsored during the session. Can you please update us on the status of House Bill 21, Breonna's Law? You introduced the bill that would expand Louisville's ban on no-knock warrants statewide. Please compare it with the watered-down version introduced by Senator Stivers.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Dr. Dawson Edwards. And I started out where Chantrice is today as a grassroots lobbyist when I worked for Kentucky Jobs with Justice and was first a member of Kentuckians for the Commonwealth. And so, man, Chantrice, I'm so glad you're one of my neighbors, because this seat is ready for you for sure. And I've known Representative Jenkins since way before I was in office, and she was one of the first people who chose not to respond defensively when I called out the Democratic Party for ignoring the needs of Black folks. She instead reached out and said, let's talk about this. Let's figure out how we can do a much better job as a party of representing the needs of Black folks. Everybody else got mad. And Councilwoman McCraney, I did get a chance to work with when I served on Louisville Metro Council because we didn't overlap, but I appreciate you reminding folks that the work that is currently happening on Metro Council is possible because of years and decades of organizing that has happened in Louisville, right? And you've been part of that work. So I just wanted to acknowledge all of you because you all bring something unique to this conversation. So House Bill 21 is the real Breonna's Law for Kentucky. And it, as Dr. Dawson Edwards said, it would expand Louisville's no-knock warrants bill that was passed unanimously back in June. It would end no-knock warrants, ban no-knock warrants. It would mandate alcohol and drug testing of police officers who are involved in deadly incidences like the murder of Breonna Taylor. And it would mandate the use of body-worn cameras when serving a search warrant. I say that knowing good and well that body-worn cameras are not the end-all be-all of anything. We know that somehow they don't get turned on, or somehow the battery's always dead. We know that, but I also wanted to be responsive to what the family's attorney was asking for. And it was the only bill that was named after Breonna Taylor. On the end, it was only heard for discussion in committee at the end of session and not which would not have given it enough time to be voted on and have any chance of passing both chambers. On the other hand, you have Senate Bill 4, which Senate President Stivers filed, which is a weaker version of Breonna's law. It limits some no-knock warrants in certain situations, but it does not ban no-knock warrants. It also doesn't have any real police accountability measures in it, like alcohol and drugs. That was my brother calling me. And it also did not carry Breonna's name. But in all honesty, it is, in my opinion, not worthy of her name because it is a much weaker version of Louisville's bill, for example, that was passed unanimously. So unfortunately, we have 2 amendments that have been filed to Senate Bill 4, which did pass our House Judiciary Committee. Those 2 amendments are horrendous, and they basically justify what happened the night that Breonna Taylor was murdered. So we have to be really mindful of that, because if those amendments get tacked on to Senate Bill 4 and it passes with those amendments, it is definitely not Breonna's law. Why in the world would we want a bill called Breonna's law that justifies her murder? So that's where we are right now with those 2 bills. House Bill 21, our Breonna's law that was crafted with the people, it has no more life to it because it was halted in committee. And Senate Bill 4 is the one that's moving forward. The thing that I will add to that is when we filed House Bill 21 in August, the Kentucky State Fraternal Order of Police came after me viciously on all of their social media platforms. But when the white president of the Senate, a man, filed his no-knock warrants bill, they were silent. So, you know, that's the reality that I face in our state capitol, being one of now 2 Black women and 3 women of color.
Thank you. I know that you take up the challenge to sponsor and create legislation that works for people that look like us, and I know how incredibly difficult that must be in that space. And so I just want to thank you for continuing to do that. I mean, I particularly understand the issues with criminal justice and policing. So I first want to say that when I spoke in front of VMAP, I guess that's the acronym for the Veterans Military Affairs Public Protection Committee. I was very grateful to hear your voice on the line and chime into that conversation. So I like I said, I can only imagine having to work in that space. So thank you for representing us as well as you do. So I know that there's some recent news on this piece of legislation, but can you talk a little bit about this bill that everyone believes would totally violate the First Amendment, but I guess it's Senate Bill 211, which is meant to deter protesters and would make it a crime to provoke an officer verbally to the point that it would provoke a violent response from the officer. Can you tell me your thoughts about that? I think I read that it's not going anywhere, but just the existence of it alone tells us a lot.
Sure. And we also had a House bill that my daughter and our pro bono attorney who helped us out with getting our charges dropped when we were unjustly arrested. They both testified on a House bill that would basically say that the Attorney General could prosecute us even though the county attorney dropped our charges. And that committee could care less about my child being before them testifying or me serving on that committee with them because they passed that bill out of the committee. Senate Bill 211, maybe it won't go anywhere. We still have 2 days left in the session. Until we sign and die, I don't ever believe bills are not going anywhere. So I'm waiting for 11:59 on March 30th. But Senate Bill 211 not only would say that if you hurt a police officer's feelings with your words, that you could be arrested by them. It also says that if someone is in their car, and they feel threatened by the marchers who are coming toward them, they can plow us down or they could shoot us. So we've got to be mindful of that. I mean, this is a piece of legislation that is fascism in action. That's exactly what it is. And so I'm really concerned about this bill. And it's coming from someone who needs to be minding his business back home, where he's got lawsuits filed against him for sexual harassment at his nonprofit. So while he's trying to detract from that by attacking and retaliating against protesters, he's got women who are accusing him of sexual harassment. So we've got to do work in Kentucky of keeping all of us safe, Black folks, Latinx folks, Asian folks, and women who face harassment from not only legislators and people in community, but law enforcement as well. But State Representative Jenkins mentioned Representative Rachel Roberts from Northern Kentucky, and she also filed a bill related to police sexually assaulting and harassing people in their custody. And while her bill didn't get to be heard, the Senate version did. And so there's so much work to do around police accountability. I've said it loudly and often that I believe we need to defund and dismantle the system because it was never designed for Black folks anyway. At least it wasn't designed for our liberation. It was designed for bringing us back into enslavement. And we need to imagine something different. We don't have to maintain these systems. For some reason, we've convinced ourselves we just have to have policing. And obviously it's not working, but we haven't yet developed the will to break it down, dismantle it, and create something that actually works for people.
Thank you very much. So those are my questions. I want to invite those in attendance to please post questions in the chat. But before I go to any questions that may pop up in the chat, I just want to open the floor up to everyone on the panel to just, give some feedback or respond or add to anything else that anyone spoke about. I think what's so interesting about this panel that Celeste and we create is that there's all these interconnections, especially as relates to the year that we had and the different ways that people showed up and needed to show up. And so I guess I'll just open up with a very general question about just Louisville in 2020, about what, I know that a lot that we've lived here for a long time. I know I'm from Louisville, like what did that mean for you in the work that you do to experience Louisville as it was as it is, or as it was in 2020? Because I know for me, it was a different Louisville than I've ever seen. It doesn't mean that we've changed, but it was, for at least moments, a different Louisville than I'd ever seen. A Louisville that gave me hope as a Black woman briefly. That hope is being decimated all the time. But I saw such beautiful responses from women in particular as leaders in this city that I think that I just wouldn't be doing justice if we didn't pause and take a moment to reflect on what that meant to us as women doing work, whatever level of work we are doing. So what are your thoughts on 2020 Louisville and what that means for us as leaders, women leaders in this state and in the city?
I'd like to share something. I am not from Louisville, Kentucky, but I am from Tulsa, Oklahoma. And if you know about Tulsa, you know about the Tulsa Race Massacre. Some would call it the Tulsa Race Riots, but it was not that. It was a massacre. And we have in our history, the Black Wall Street. That's where Black people in Tulsa were very successful, very progressive people who owned banks and schools and restaurants. They had doctors and lawyers and just professional people. And the people of that community who did not look like my relatives were jealous. And I don't know why they were so jealous, because they would not allow them to go to their restaurants and their schools. So they had no choice but to build their own. But so as the story goes, they blame it on one Black gentleman, and they burned the whole city down. That portion of Black America, that portion of the city, they burned to the ground. And it was never able to rebuild itself. And so now if you visit that area, north side of Tulsa, you'll find that it's gentrified. And no one in that Black community owns the property there. So when 2020 occurred in Louisville, Kentucky, which is now proudly my home, and I raised both of my children here, who are now grown, it gave me a sense of pride to know that it was at that time I was in a position to make things happen. So I was just thankful to God that I was able to look at what was going on and affect some change. And that's why I was very adamant in my approach to the Civilian Review Board, while I was so adamant about no knock. In fact, maybe you don't know, but our Metro Council started out to look at just not banning no-knock completely. We were going to ban a portion of it and leave some excuses for no-knocks to exist. And it was something that I thought we should not even consider. I wrote to each of my colleagues and I said, look, if we're going to do this, we might as well do it the right way. And I gave all the explanations that I could think of to why we needed to ban them completely. Now, I'm not saying all of my colleagues did not think about banning it completely, but I think that we were hearing some rumblings from some people in the community that they didn't want to ban them completely. But I just took a whole stance and said, we need to do this. We need to ban them completely. And I'm so thankful that we got that legislation done. So for me, it was a time for me to figure out where I fit in best. And while I could give some money to the movement or just secretly in private, give some people some money because they were doing their work and they were, that's not their job and they probably needed a little extra. I was able to do that. Where I could take water to the movement, I did that. Where I could supply masks, I did that. But I was very grateful that I was able to make legislative changes. And that's where I fit in the best. And I'm going to continue to do the work that others will not be able to do because their voices are not normally heard.
Thank you. Anybody else? Somebody else?
I'll jump in here a little bit. There is still work to do. And I was very disappointed that we were not able to pass subpoena powers for the new Citizen Review Board. There was a bill that was filed in the House Bill 309, that had what I think was billed as a subpoena power that really wasn't. It was still going through the council. There were lots of problems with that, but it also made some decisions for Louisville Metro residents about running the mayor nonpartisan, changing our terms. There's a disturbing piece put in there about annexation that no one really knew what happened. It looks like now 309 is probably not going to go forward. If it does, it would probably be vetoed by the governor and there'd be no opportunity to override it. But Senator McGarvey, my counterpart over in the Senate, the Democratic floor leader, who is from Louisville as well, I think has a pretty good approach to it. It's House Bill 2. All right, I've already forgotten the number. I'm getting it mixed up with another bill. I'm sorry?
247.
Thank you, 247. I'm getting it mixed up with 270, which is about Simmons College and Kentucky State University, which I think is going to pass. We should do that when we come back. But I'm really disappointed that his bill hasn't moved. There's always the opportunity. Sometimes Phoenix is, Lazarus arise or Phoenix arises, on the last days of session. But that's one tool that I think the Citizen Review Board needs. They need to be able to compel people to come forward and to be sworn in and testify with some teeth if they don't tell the truth. So I think if that doesn't pass by the 30th, that's something we need to look at over the interim.
I need to say this because it's very important to say, because currently the Civilian Review and Accountability Board does not have subpoena power. It does not mean it is toothless, because if you read the ordinance, we were very, very careful, and I fought for this. It does state that anyone that works within the Louisville Metro government must comply with the request to testify. They must turn over certain documents to the Inspector General. So it's not a toothless bill. It's much, much better than what we had in existence. So I am fighting hard for subpoena power, and I'm still holding out for this legislative session, because I understand that the powers to be are willing to still talk about it with McGarvey in place. So if that's the case, let's do it. But you're right, 309 was a poison bill, and it had so many different elements to it that I knew subpoena power wouldn't, in that portion of the bill, would not survive. but I don't want that issue to die. But I don't want the community to think that the Civilian Review and Accountability Board will not be effective, because it would still be able to compel evidence and to compel people to speak and testify without subpoena power. And there was so many other things that the board will be able to do. So please don't give up on the Civilian Review Board, and just don't give up on our delegation as well. I think that I'm hoping that you all will continue to fight for that subpoena power.
Any other comments on 2020? So I think there are actually, I have a question. Representative Jenkins, you mentioned, I guess it's House Bill 270. I don't remember if it was Senate bill or House. It was about Simmons College and Kentucky State University. Just because a lot of people don't know this, but I worked at Kentucky State University twice. I've worked at 2 HBCUs. My first teaching job was at Virginia State University. So I have this like long-lasting love with HBCUs, and my grandfather and my father graduated from Kentucky State University. So I'm just curious, because I can't keep up with all bills, but what is the bill about related to Simmons College and KSU?
Senate Bill 270, Morgan McGarvey's bill, sets up a partnership between Simmons College and Kentucky State University around teacher certification. We know that in Kentucky, we have a real lack of teachers of color, and how necessary that is for our school systems. So that would set up a special partnership between them, so Simmons College can start producing teachers here in our community. So I think it's a real innovative idea that I hope passes this time. You know, the other thing that I hope we continue talking about is the very interesting idea of creating a TIF in the West End, and setting up a mechanism for more development with what I think could be very strong guardrails against gentrification, to hold property owned right now, personal property owned in the West End, at the tax rate it is now. So as development happens, people aren't priced out through their personal property taxes. It came late. I was very concerned about the buy-in from the community. Was not in on the front end, so I don't know what all went on, but it didn't seem like, when I got the call late in the session as the leader in the House, the first thing I said, have you talked to the representatives that represent those zip codes? And they said no. And I said, that's a big problem. We need to bring those people in really quickly. And so that leads me to believe that maybe citizens in those zip codes haven't been involved as much as they should or could be. So I think that's the bill that is probably going to be studied and talked about over the interim. So I'm hopeful that when it comes back in 22, that more work has done around the community, because I think it's a really innovative idea about bringing development to the West End.
Does anyone else want to comment on the TIF? I know that was a question that was in the chat, so I'm glad you brought that up. Chantrese?
I mean, it goes back to what we've all talked about. Part of the power of 2020 was that the average person was involved. And we know that the uprisings were more powerful because it was COVID and there was nothing to distract people from racism. Those of us who experience it can't help but notice it, but those who have the privilege to just write about it, or not think about it at all, right? They didn't have the NFL to distract them. They weren't going to work. There just was nothing else. It was in your face. And the power of the people, which is something everyone on this panel has seen the value in. I think that for the TIF, it failed because it didn't have that very valuable piece. And I love a lot of the work that Senator McGarvey does. This is my first year as a lobbyist, so I know that these things can be complicated. There's bureaucracy, but nothing should move without the people. And it doesn't mean that like you have to go door to door to every single resident in that district, but you have to make an effort. And a very minimal effort is like, writing an email to a colleague. It's not like, you know, Representative Scott lives in Florida, right? Representative Scott is in the next office virtually. And during COVID, it's an even easier time to reach out to people. And so I think there were some good intentions. However, many of the people who worked on the legislation, what I experienced on our Black Lives Matter TIF conversation, didn't even know the answers to our basic questions about the TIF, and that's concerning. It means that any and everything could be slipped in, things could be left out. There's a saying that, like, if you don't intentionally include, you will unintentionally exclude, right? And so there are so many ways that it could go wrong. There was nothing in there for renters, right? Again, as I mentioned earlier, 39% of the West End is homeowners who live here. And so that means the vast majority of people in this community are either renters or they're unhoused, which also had no provision in this TIF. And I think the only TIF that was mentioned, a previous TIF, was with the Yum Center, and that one didn't work. So even if we knew what a TIF was when it was first introduced, you know, it's like, is it gonna work? And I know that there were some really amazing people who worked on it, and it's nothing against them. Like I said, I like a lot of the work Senator McGarvey does. I don't know who else, you know, the total team that was involved, but I think it's imperative that people are included on the front end so we can avoid this. There might be a version of a TIF that's amazing and revolutionary and changes the game and stops poverty and stops evictions and all that, but we'll never know if we don't first go to the people who are most directly impacted. And I think that was the failure, not necessarily the structure of it, but the fact that it was not presented to the average person who would be impacted on the front end before we even decided, hey, this is something we're going to propose.
And I was just going to say, I'll add to that as a state representative who serves a third of the West End of Louisville, who didn't hear about it until 2 days before the bill was filed. Heard something in passing from the president of the Senate a month before, but that was it. And then didn't hear anything again until 2 days before the bill was filed. I had some real concerns about the person who was filing the bill. At first it was going to be a Senate bill, and then the powers that be realized that it couldn't be a Senate bill, that it had to originate in the House. And then they got someone to sponsor the bill who lives as far away from West Louisville as he can possibly get without being in Oldham County. And also someone who campaigned on racial hatred, and yet that's who's sponsoring the TIF. And as Black folks, I guess we just are okay with that. I also had some issues with the whole setup of the TIF and the fact that only 4 of the 9 neighborhoods in West Louisville would have representation on the advisory board. Chantrice and I live in Parkland. Parkland always gets left out of almost everything. So here's yet another thing that we probably would have been left out of because you only have 4 seats instead of 9. And I know there were some concerns about the board being too large. It's currently at 17. Add 5 more seats and get it to 22. If you can't manage a board of 22, that's an issue with your leadership. That's not an issue with the board size. And also the fact that the TIF stretches all the way to almost the University of Louisville. And so that was concerning for me as well. Just a whole lot of other issues and concerns surrounding the TIF. To Chantrice's point, no, we didn't necessarily have the capacity or the time, and particularly with COVID, to knock on people's doors. But I love knocking on doors, especially in District 41. And I would have readily knocked on doors and talked to folks over the course of this summer if we had, given the TIF that kind of time to truly reach out and engage with folks. I am concerned about, and these are questions that haven't yet been answered, with freezing property value for, I believe it's 30 years, what impact is that going to have on school board money and our taxes that contribute to education? I got real concerns about that because that's where the money for education comes from our property taxes. I'm a renter, and so my experience is different, but that's still a concern of mine. So still lots of other issues and concerns I have around the TIF that need to be addressed during the interim session. We don't need to rush this because, quite frankly, we have white saviors who are trying to do all this performative politics around so-called racial equity and racial justice, while at the same time allowing bills like Senate Bill 211 to even be heard and pass out of committee and pass off the Senate floor.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I like how you said that. And so always the devil is in the detail, right? And so that's why we have to be vigilant in how we approach any type of bill. And so it's been said, all of a sudden somebody wants to give you something. Shouldn't you be aware of that? Wouldn't you be weary of that? And that's what this TIF does. TIF stands for Tax Increment Financing. And so anything as complicated as a TIF should have been explained on the front end. And you should get the people who live in the area that will be most affected to understand it and to have input in it. And so any future development and any future businesses that will collect taxes, those taxes will go towards this new redevelopment. So it's going to be years and years and years before you can see some actual results from it. So I don't think it should be rushed. I think we should pull back on it. And I think that it should be explained. And I think the community that's most affected by it should be brought into the conversation. And so I am asking the people of that area, and I don't represent the West End, but I certainly have a love and an affinity for Black people because I grew up in that side of town. For Tulsa, it's north side, like it's equated to the West End. And I am a Black woman. So I just, and one other thing is I'm the banker on the council. So anything to do with any type of financing, I expect to be included in the conversation because I can hear things better than just the normal attorney or someone else who has no banking background. So I'm very leery of the TIF myself. It could work if it's done properly, but this one was rushed and it needs to kind of be pulled back on so that we can investigate it and ask more questions.
Thank you. There is a question in the chat about COVID funding for Kentucky let's see. I understand that a large portion of the COVID funding in Kentucky is going to Kentucky is going to receive is being put in a rainy day fund. What can be done to stop that?
That's a little. It's a little bit incorrect. It's not the COVID funding per se. Kentucky's revenues are up this year. And some people say it's because of the federal stimulus money, because when you put money into middle income, lower income folks' pockets, they spend it right in their community and that money turns over and over and over again. So we increase sales tax. So our sales tax are way up. And so in a year that our budget and revenues look really, really good, the governor's budget proposal spent a lot of that money, made investments into broadband and into the unemployment insurance system, which that's a whole couple hours to talk about that, and put what I thought was a reasonable amount of money in the rainy day fund. The Republicans want the rainy day fund to be $1.2 billion with a B. It probably needs to be around 600 million in our rainy day fund. That would be a new high for it. But they did also say that the legislation that's been coming through, we know that there is federal stimulus money coming through state government, 2.4 billion with a B. I think Louisville is getting directly to the city of Louisville, or Louisville Metro, is getting like 480 million, I believe. Okay. She said 400 and something. I can't read lips.
About 434.
Okay, 434. What's a few million between friends, right? But the Republicans don't want the Republican legislature does not want the governor spending that money, and they have put some really bizarre language in place that says that if the governor spends any of that federal money, they're gonna fine the finance cabinet like $90 million or something crazy. It's something really, really crazy. You know, my philosophy is, if it ain't raining in Kentucky right now, when is it ever going to be raining? And I think we need direct help for individuals. We need direct help to small businesses, and we need direct help to nonprofit agencies. And through this money, we could do that. And that money does not need to be put in a savings account somewhere. It needs to be invested in our state. Every state is getting big money. You know, it was $1 trillion relief package. So we're competing with other states on how we spend this money because we want to attract businesses and people to Kentucky. And I don't think, you know, the next Bill Gates is going to say, I want to go to the state that put all the money in a savings account. I think they're going to say, I want to go to the state that is moving the needle on health, is moving the needle on education, is moving the needle on economic development. So I am pro, let's spend that money. Let's, you know, I suggested to the governor is that we get economists and experts in health, education, and the economy into a room and say, give us 10 big ideas. Because I think this is worthy of a big, bold idea.
Thank you. Well, I don't see any more questions. Thank you, Chantrice, for answering Gracie's question in the chat. I don't see any more questions. We usually have this series until 5:30. I hear and see that it's a beautiful day. I have not been outside today, so I hope that everyone will go outside. And I know State Representative Attica Scott is talking about today's vigil that is down at Waterfront Park or close to the Big Four Bridge, I believe at 6 p.m. That is sponsored by Rep. Kulkarni, Nima Kulkarni. So if no one knows about that, please look in, it's all over social media, whatnot, and please go support her in the vigil that is about the anti-Asian hate that is going on, or as people would say, the white terrorism that has been going on toward our Asian American and Pacific Islander fellow Americans or folks that live in our country. So please be mindful of that. And I know that we have our last Yearlings Club Forum series will be in April. We will be sending out information on that soon. I just want to thank everyone so much for being here. You all, like I expected, you were a power pack panel that brought us a wealth of knowledge and information and lots to think about how we can support your work in making these policy moves and policy changes. So we appreciate you for that. I always want to give a shout out to Celeste Lanier, who works in my office and coordinates with the Yearlings Club every month to create this forum series that is always just excellent, I believe. So thank you all so much for being here with us. You're getting some thanks and great conversation, presentation in the chat. Please enjoy your day. And it was so good to talk to you all and see you all. And particularly those of the new friends I have in the decades of friends. And I actually didn't mention this, but I've known Attica for a long time too. We served on a board together in my early years on the ACLU of Kentucky board. So yes, Louisville is that small, big town where everybody knows everybody in some capacity. So it is great to see you all. Have a great day. Thank you so much.